All right, so we're going to continue on page 117, chapter 23, Consequences. There were, of course, dire consequences of Rescuer's behavior. Every action, reader, no matter how small, has a consequence. For instance, the young Rescuer gnawed on Gregory the jailer's rope, and because he gnawed on the rope, a match was lit in his face, and because of the match was lit in his face, his soul was set afire. The rat's soul was set afire, and because of this, he journeyed upstairs, seeking the light. Upstairs in the banquet hall, the Princess Pea spotted him and called out the word rat. And because of this, Roscuro fell into the queen's soup. And because the rat fell into the queen's soup, the queen died. You can see, can't you, how everything is related to everything else? You can see quite clearly how every action has a consequence. For instance, if reader, you will indulge me and allow me to continue this meditation on consequences. Because the queen died while eating soup, the heartbroken king outlawed soup. And because soup was outlawed, so were all the instruments involved in the making and eating of soup. Spoons and bowls and kettles. These things were collected from all the people of the kingdom of Dor, and they were piled in the dungeon. And because Rescuro was dazzled by the light of one match and journeyed upstairs and fell into the queen's soup, and the queen died, the king ordered the death of every rat in the land. The king's men went bravely into the dungeon to kill the rats. But the thing about killing a rat is that you must first find a rat. And if a rat does not want to be found, reader, he will not be found. The king's men succeeded only in getting lost in the dungeon's tortuous mazes. Some of them, in fact, did not ever find their way out again and died there in the dark heart of the castle. And so, the killing of all rats was not successful, and in desperation, King Philip declared that rats were illegal. He declared them outlaws. This, of course, was a ridiculous law, as rats are outlaws to begin with. How can you outlaw an outlaw? It is a waste of time and energy, but still, the king officially decreed that all rats in the kingdom of Dor were outlaws and should be treated as such. When you are a king, you may make as many ridiculous laws as you like. That is what being a king is all about. But reader, we must not forget that King Philip loved the queen and that without her he was lost. This is the danger of loving. No matter how powerful you are, no matter how many kingdoms you rule, you cannot stop those you love from dying. Making soup illegal, outlawing rats, these things soothe the poor king's heart. And so we must forgive him. And what of the outlawed rats? What of the outlawed rat in particular? What of Chiaroscuro? In the darkness of the dungeon, he sat in the nest with the spoon atop his head. He set to work, fashioning for himself a kingly cape made out of scrap of red tablecloth. And as he worked, old one-eared Bonicelli Remorso sat next to him, swinging his locket back and forth, saying, "You will see what comes from a rat going upstairs. I hope that you have learned your lesson. Your job in this world is to make others suffer." "Yes," muttered Roscuro. "Yes, that is exactly what I intend to do. I will make the princess suffer for how she looked at me. And Rescuro worked and planned. The jailer, Gregory, held tight to his rope and made his own way through the darkness and in a dank cell. The prisoner, who had once had a red tablecloth and now had nothing, spent his days and nights weeping quietly. High above the dungeon, upstairs in the castle, a small mouse stood alone one evening as his brothers and sisters sniffed for crumbs. He stood with his head cocked to one side, listening to a sweet sound he did not yet have a name for. There would be consequences of the mouse's love for music. You, reader, know already some of those consequences. Because of the music, the mouse would find his way to the princess. He would fall in love. And speaking of consequences, the same evening that Despereaux stood inside the castle hearing music, for the first time outside the castle, in the gloom of dusk, more consequences drew near. A wagon driven by a king's soldier and piled high with spoons and bowls and kettles was making its way to the castle. And beside the soldier there sat a young girl with ears that looked like nothing so much as pieces of cauliflower stuck on either side of her head. The girl's name, reader, was Miggery Sow, and though she did not yet know it, she would be instrumental in helping the rat work his revenge. End of the second book. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and start the second part. The third part. Book the third. Gore, the tale of Miggery Sow. All right. And we are starting on page 125. We're getting through our book. Woo. All right, here we go. Chapter 24. A handful of cigarettes, a red tablecloth, and a pen, and a hen. Again, reader, we must go backward before we can go forward. With that said, here begins a short history of the life and times of Miggery Sow, a girl born into this world many years before the mouse of Despereaux and the rat Rescuro. A girl born far from the castle, a girl named for her father's favorite prize-winning pig. Miggery Sow was 6 years old when her mother, holding on to Mig's hand and staring directly into Mig's eyes, died. Ma? Said Mig. Ma, couldn't you stay here with me? Oh, said her mother. What was that? Who is that holding my hand? It's me, Ma, Miggery Sow. Ah, child, let me go. But I want you to stay here, said Mig, wiping first her runny nose and then at her runny eyes. You want, said her mother. Yes, said Mig, I want. Ah, child, and what does it matter what you are wanting, said her mother. She squeezed Mig's hand once, twice, and then she died, leaving Mig alone with her father, who, on a market day in spring, soon after his wife's death, sold his daughter into service for a handful of cigarettes, a red tablecloth, and a hen. Papa, said Mig, when her father was walking away from her with the hen in his arms, a cigarette in his mouth, and the red tablecloth draped across his shoulders like a cape. Go on, Mig, he said. You belong to that man now. But I don't want to, Papa, she said. I want to go with you. She took hold of the red tablecloth and tugged on it. Lord, child, her father said, and who is asking you what you want? Go on now. He untangled her fingers from the cloth and turned her in the direction of the man who had bought her. Meg watched her father walk away, the red tablecloth billowing out behind him. He left his daughter, and, reader, as you already know, he did not look back, not even once. Can you imagine it? Can you imagine your father selling you for a tablecloth, a hen, and a handful of cigarettes? Close your eyes, please, and consider it for just a moment. Done? I hope that the hair on your back of your neck stood up as you thought of Meg's fate and how it would be if it were your own. Poor Meg! What will become of her? You must, frightened though you may be, read on and see for yourself. Reader, it is your duty. Chapter 25, A Vicious Circle. Miggery Sow called the man who purchased her uncle, as he said she must. And also, as she said she must, Megan tended Uncle's sheep and cooked Uncle's food and scrubbed Uncle's kettle. She did all of this without a word of thanks or praise from the man himself. Another unfortunate fact of life with Uncle was that he very much liked giving Mig what he referred to as a good clout to the ear. In fairness to Uncle, it must be reported that he did always inquire whether or not Mig was interested in receiving the clout. Their daily exchanges went something like this. Uncle, I thought I told you to clean the kennel. Mig, I cleaned it, Uncle. I cleaned it good. Uncle, it's filthy. You'll have to be punished, won't ye? Mig, Gore, Uncle, I cleaned the kettle. Uncle, are ye saying that I am a liar, girl? Mig, no, Uncle. Uncle, do you want a good clout to the ear then? Mig, no, thank you, Uncle, I don't. Alas, Uncle seemed to be as entirely unconcerned with what Mig wanted as her mother and father had been. The discussed clout to the ear was always delivered, I am afraid, with a great deal of enthusiasm on Uncle's part, and received with absolutely no enthusiasm at all on the part of Mig. These clouts were alarmingly frequent, and Uncle was scrupulously fair in paying attention to both the right and left side of Miggery Sow. So it was that after a time, the young Mig's ear came to resemble not so much ears as pieces of cauliflower stuck to the side of her head, and they became about as useful to her as pieces of cauliflower. That is to say, that they all but ceased their functioning as ears. Words for Meg lost their sharp edges, and then they lost their edges altogether and became blurry, blankety things that she had a great deal of trouble making any sense out of it at all. Then, the less Meg heard, the less she understood. The less she understood, the more things she did wrong. And the more things she did wrong, the more clouts to the ear she received, and the less she heard. This is what is known as a vicious circle. And Miggery Sow was right in the center of it, which is not, reader, where anybody would want to be. But then, as you know, what Miggery Sow wanted had never been much of a concern to anyone.